I wasn't trying to listen in. But when you're sitting alone in a cafe and the women at the next table get loud enough to drown out your thoughts, you start catching things. One of them leaned forward and whispered something that stopped me cold. Red summer. The others gasped, laughed, like she'd just said something scandalous. Then she said it again, clearer this time. You know, the secret club where anything goes. And that's when my heart skipped. I'd heard that name before. But not from strangers. From my husband. It was a few weeks ago, late at night. He was pacing the bedroom on the phone, thinking I was asleep. I remember the way he laughed, low and nervous. And then, almost in a whisper, "No, I don't think she knows about Red Summer." I never asked him about it. I wanted to, but I was tired of being the paranoid wife, tired of feeling dramatic. So I buried it. Until today. Until that conversation pulled it right back into the light. I sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left. That name, Red Summer, echoed in my mind, louder now, heavier. Suddenly, all the late nights, the vague excuses, the canceled plans, they didn't feel random anymore. They felt planned, patterned, like puzzle pieces I'd been ignoring. And just like that, something in me shifted. I didn't have proof yet, but I had something better. A reason to finally find out. I started replaying everything in my head like scenes from a movie I hadn't realized I was living in. The way he'd come home late, smelling like some cologne he didn't own. How he'd jump if I walked into the room while he was on his phone. I used to ignore those things. Told myself marriage goes through phases. That he was just tired, distracted, stressed. But now I was starting to see things with painful clarity, and I hated that it made sense. Even the way he touched me had changed. Softer, but somehow more distant, like a man hugging a ghost of his wife. And I kept asking myself, when did that shift happen? Was it gradual, or was there one night where everything cracked and I just didn't notice? I couldn't believe how many moments I'd brushed off. I wasn't stupid. I was just hopeful. And hope has a way of blinding you when you love someone more than they probably deserve. The hardest part was realizing I hadn't imagined it all. That quiet little voice in the back of my head, the one I kept shoving down, it had been right. I felt it now. This knot of betrayal tightening inside me. And as I sat there, the cafe buzzing behind me like a world I no longer belonged to, I knew I had a choice. I could keep pretending, or I could start looking. Really looking. And if I did that, I had a feeling I wouldn't like what I'd find. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed beside him, listening to his breathing, steady and peaceful, like he hadn't been dragging my trust behind him all this time. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if he had any idea that something had shifted, that I'd stopped being the woman who waited for answers, and started becoming the one who would find them. He rolled over at one point, arm brushing mine, and whispered, "Love you." I stayed quiet. I didn't even flinch. The next morning, I found myself Googling Red Summer. Nothing came up, at least nothing obvious. It was like the place didn't exist, not officially, but I wasn't stupid. The absence of information only made me more certain. It wasn't a bar. It wasn't a joke. It was something people whispered about, something hidden. And that meant it wasn't just casual. It was intentional, secretive. And I needed to know why. I started watching him differently. Not accusing, not confronting, just observing. His patterns, his tells. The way he smiled when his phone buzzed after dinner. How he'd take certain calls on the patio, pacing in circles like a caged animal. I wasn't ready to explode. Not yet. I was going to be smart about this, precise. If he really thought he could lie to me and get away with it, well, he'd soon find out exactly who he'd married. The only person I could trust with this was Laura. She's been my best friend since college, the kind of woman who shows up with wine and takeout when life feels too heavy to carry. I didn't plan to tell her. I wasn't even sure how to say it out loud without sounding paranoid. But the moment she saw me that afternoon, the way I fidgeted with my keys, the tight smile, she knew something was wrong. "Talk," she said, setting down her bag like we had all the time in the world. I told her everything. The overheard conversation. The late-night phone call. The name Red Summer echoing through my brain like a warning bell I couldn't unhear. She didn't interrupt, didn't laugh, didn't try to play devil's advocate like so many people do when you hint at something this ugly. Instead, she leaned back on the couch, arms crossed, and her face went serious in a way that told me I wasn't imagining any of this. "Rachel," she said, "if you think he's lying, let's prove it." I could have cried right then. Not because I was sad, I'd already cried enough behind locked bathroom doors, but because I felt seen, understood. There's something about having just one person believe you that shifts everything. Suddenly, I wasn't this crazy wife spinning stories in her head. I was a woman with questions, valid ones, and now I wasn't alone in finding the answers. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all settling in the space between us. Laura was already shifting into action mode, the way she always did when someone hurt me. "Okay," she said, eyes narrowing with purpose. "We're not just going to sit around waiting for more crumbs. We're going to catch him, clean." The way she said it, it wasn't dramatic. It was calm, focused, like we were solving a mystery instead of dismantling my marriage. She pulled out her phone and started making a list. "We'll need to know his schedule, his patterns, when he's out late, where he goes. If he's lying, he's bound to make a mistake." I watched her, amazed at how easily she shifted into detective mode. A part of me was grateful, deeply. Another part? It hurt that this is what it had come to, that I had to make plans around my husband's deception, like a woman preparing for war in her own home. Still, there was something oddly empowering about it, like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized I'd handed over. For so long, I'd been the one making excuses for him, to our friends, to myself. He's just busy. He's under pressure. But now I had backup. A witness. A partner in truth. And with Laura by my side, I wasn't just doubting anymore. I was hunting. We spent the rest of that afternoon talking through every detail I could remember. The nights he came home late, the times he claimed he was networking, but didn't have a single new contact in his phone. I even remembered the scent of perfume that clung to his shirt once. Not mine, not even close. At the time, he laughed it off, said someone at the office must have hugged him. I laughed too. God, I wish I hadn't. Laura listened carefully, asking questions that made me dig deeper, sharper. Did he ever come back with new clothes? Did he ever disappear without texting? It was like peeling back layers of a story I'd been too afraid to tell, and the more I spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't a gut feeling. It was a trail, and we were finally following it, step by step, back to its rotten source. By the end of it, we had a plan. Not reckless, not emotional, just precise. The next time he said he had a meeting, I wouldn't stay home wondering. Laura would drive, I'd watch, I'd know. And if the trail led us to Red Summer, I'd stop being the woman who waited for answers. I'd become the woman who gave them. The opportunity came faster than I expected. That Friday, he walked into the kitchen with his usual half smile, loosened his tie, and said the words like he always did, like they meant nothing. "I've got a late meeting tonight. Probably won't be back until after midnight." I stirred my tea and nodded like I believed him, like I hadn't been waiting all week for this exact lie. My hands trembled under the table, but my face stayed calm. I had a role to play, and I played it well. He left around 9, suit jacket pressed, phone glued to his ear. I stood at the window just long enough to see him back out of the driveway, then grabbed my bag and slipped outside where Laura was already waiting. "He's on the move?" she asked, engine idling. I nodded, heart racing, pulse pounding in my ears. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just shifted the car into drive and followed like we'd done this 100 times before. We kept our distance. Just enough to see him, not enough to be seen. Every red light felt like a test. Every turn, a warning. I stared at his taillights like they were going to lead me to the truth, and in a way, they were. He drove with purpose, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. And when we saw the glowing red sign ahead, Red Summer, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, real, tangible. And just like that, denial was no longer an option. We parked half a block away, just out of sight. From the passenger seat, I watched him step out of the car, straighten his shirt, then glance at himself in the side mirror like a man preparing for a date. Not a meeting, a date. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I just stared, memorizing the way he smiled into his phone. So easy, so relaxed, and felt something in me begin to harden. It wasn't sadness, not anymore. It was something colder, sharper. There were people outside the club, chatting in small clusters, dressed like secrets. He walked past them with confidence, nodding at the bouncer like they knew each other. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't his first time. This wasn't an accident. This place, this ritual. It was familiar to him. Routine. And I'd been home every time, folding laundry, making dinner, checking my phone like a fool, waiting for him to come back to the version of our life I thought was real. Laura reached over and gently squeezed my hand, like she knew the scream I was holding in. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. But I wasn't. I was splintered, watching the man I married walk into a world he never once invited me into, a world built on lies and shadows. And the worst part? He looked happy, free, like I'd been the cage all along. That was the moment I stopped wanting to catch him. I wanted him to feel what I was feeling. We waited in silence, the hum of the engine barely louder than my thoughts. I imagined walking in there, confronting him on the spot. Screaming, slapping, shaming. But none of that felt satisfying anymore. No, I didn't want a scene. I wanted impact. Something he'd never forget. Something that would haunt him the way this night would haunt me. I wasn't going to fall apart in front of him. I was going to make him unravel. Laura lit a cigarette, even though she'd quit years ago. Maybe she needed the ritual. Maybe I did too. The glow of the tip cast light on her face as she looked over at me. "You want to go in there?" she asked softly. I thought about it. Really thought. The woman I'd been a month ago would have said no. But the one sitting there now? She wasn't waiting for explanations anymore. She wanted closure. The kind you take, not the kind you're given. I looked at the building, at its red neon sign flickering like a dare, and something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a woman with a plan. "Stay here," I said, opening the door. Laura didn't argue. She just nodded, exhaling smoke into the night. My heels clicked against the pavement like a countdown, and as I stepped toward that door, my heart wasn't breaking anymore. It was preparing for the end, and the beginning of something else. The moment I stepped through the door, it hit me. The smell of expensive perfume, sweat, and something else. Something unspoken, almost electric. The lights were low, pulsing red and gold, casting shadows that danced across bare skin and sequins. Music thumped like a second heartbeat in my chest, too loud to think, too steady to ignore. Eyes drifted toward me, curious, hungry, but I kept walking. I wasn't there to blend in. I was there to burn something down, silently. There he was. At the far end of the room, lounging in a half-circle booth like it was his throne. Two women flanked him, laughing too loudly at something he said, their bodies leaning into his like they belonged to him. He had a drink in his hand, something amber, expensive-looking. He took a sip, smiling wide. That same smile he used to give me across our dinner table. And just like that, my stomach twisted, but not with pain, with purpose. I didn't turn back. I didn't hesitate. I slipped through the crowd like smoke, letting the music carry me toward the dance floor. I let my hips move, slowly at first, then fully, like I'd done this before, like I belonged there more than he ever had. I felt hands brush past me, saw men turning to look. I didn't flinch. I wanted him to see it, to see me. Not the version of me he took for granted, but the one who could take everything from him in a single moment. I could feel his gaze before I saw it. That invisible heat, the kind that prickles your skin like you're being watched in the dark. I turned just slightly, enough to catch him over my shoulder. His face had changed. The smugness was gone. His brows pinched, lips parted like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Good. Let him wonder. Let him stew in the confusion, the panic, the slow realization that the woman dancing in front of him was his wife. He didn't move right away. He just stared, frozen. Maybe he thought he was imagining it, that his double life had finally fractured into hallucinations. But I kept dancing, deliberately, unapologetically. And then, just to twist the knife, I smiled. Not for him, for me. Because in that moment I remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be desired. Not as a wife, not as someone's safety net. As a woman, alive, dangerous, unpredictable. A man stepped toward me, tall, sharp suit, eyes full of interest. He held out his hand without a word. I didn't ask his name. I didn't need to. I just took it. The music swallowed us as we moved together, bodies close but not desperate. It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about the dance. It was about taking up space. About making sure that the man watching from the shadows knew exactly what was coming next, and that he couldn't stop it. As I moved with this stranger, I kept my eyes just past his shoulder, watching him. My husband had finally stood up. The women beside him were saying something, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on me, jaw clenched, glass still in his hand. He looked like a man who'd just seen his world slip through his fingers. Like he'd trained for every outcome, except this one. And that made me smile even more. I leaned into my dance partner, let my fingers rest on his chest, let the moment linger just long enough. I wanted to be undeniable, unreachable. I wanted the man who once had me completely to feel what it meant to lose control. He started moving toward me then, slowly, pushing past bodies like a storm building in silence. But I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. I met his eyes across the room and held them, daring him to come closer. Daring him to make a scene in his precious little kingdom. Everything else disappeared. The music, the lights, the other people. It was just me and him and the space between us that used to be trust. I knew what was coming. I could see the anger rising in him, the questions forming. But I wasn't there to explain. I was there to show. And I had one final move left, one he'd never be able to forget. He was just a few steps away now, eyes wild, breath heavy, like he'd sprinted through every wrong decision that brought him here. And then, I did it. I turned to the man I'd been dancing with, cupped his face gently, and kissed him. Slow, confident. A kiss with intention, with fire, with every ounce of rage I'd swallowed over the years. I could feel the room shift. Conversations dropped. Music blurred. Every pair of eyes turned toward us, toward me. The man I kissed didn't ask questions. He just smiled against my mouth like he knew he was part of something bigger. But my focus was still on my husband, who stood frozen like the air had been ripped from his lungs. His expression cracked. Not just anger, but something worse. Humiliation. He looked around, realizing that everyone was watching. They weren't laughing with him anymore. They were watching the fallout, and he was at the center of it. He stormed over, jaw tight, fists clenched, face red with fury. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, loud enough to draw even more attention. I turned to him, calm as I'd ever been. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't flinch. I looked him right in the eye and said, "Don't look so shocked. You taught me how this game is played." And just like that, his face fell. Not in defeat, but in recognition. Because deep down, he knew. This was never about betrayal. It was about balance. He opened his mouth like he had something to say. An excuse, maybe, or some last-ditch attempt to flip the script. But nothing came out. Because what could he possibly say? That I'd embarrassed him? That I had crossed a line? The irony nearly made me laugh. After everything he'd done behind my back, all the nights I sat alone while he played king of this red-lit kingdom, he had the nerve to act betrayed. That silence between us said more than any argument ever could. Around us, people had stopped dancing. They were pretending not to watch, but they were. I could feel it. The whispers, the subtle glances, the curiosity that buzzed louder than the music now. And for once, I didn't shrink beneath the attention. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I simply turned my back on him, slowly, deliberately, and walked back toward the dance floor. Each step felt like shedding another layer of who I used to be. The wife, the forgiver, the fool. He didn't follow. Of course he didn't. He just stood there, alone, stripped of his performance. No more secret nights, no more smug lies, just a man exposed, not by confrontation, but by contrast. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to cry. All I had to do was let him see me, really see me, and realize he no longer had the power to look away. I danced for a while longer, not for anyone else, not even for the man I kissed, but for me. Each movement felt like a thread snapping loose, unspooling all the guilt, all the doubt, all the years I spent shrinking to keep the peace. I didn't owe him grief. I didn't owe him closure. What I owed myself was this moment, the moment I chose me, right in front of the man who thought I never would. And I made sure he saw every second of it. When I finally walked out of that place, the night air hit my skin like freedom. Laura was waiting in the car, just like she promised. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. One look at my face and she knew. I hadn't just caught him. I'd finished something, ended it on my terms. She looked at me for a beat, then smiled the kind of smile only a best friend can give. "You didn't just catch him, Rachel," she said. "You destroyed him." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I leaned back into the seat, shut the door, and stared ahead as the city lights blurred past the windshield. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was free. And as we drove away from the wreckage of everything I thought I needed to keep, I realized something I never expected. I didn't need him to be sorry. I just needed him to remember that I was never the one who lost.